Honestly, presidents came out to address Nigerians. Unfortunately, a lot of Nigerians are a bit disappointed by the speech he gave. He gave a speech the way he fits or the way he know better. But honestly, me myself, I was wondering what he's thinking about Nigerians because unfortunately, again, Mr. President just proved that he doesn't have any plan for Nigerians. No, it's so heartbreaking that Tinubu don't have any plan for you. As an each individual, you have to start thinking for yourself. Because if you are depending on such people to come and help you, I see you far, far, far they go. So listen to what the commentators they have to say about the president's speech and what is going on around Nigeria.
In the last 14 months, some of them commendable, but we also know that in leadership, the populace or citizenry are less concerned about achievements. They're rather looking at the things that are supposed to be done and have not been done. And in the specific circumstance, we're talking about the demands of the protesters, a specific demands in relation to hunger, in relation to cost of living crisis, in relation to high cost of governance, which the president slightly shied away from, and some other things like that. But again, the gratifying thing is that he called for dialogue. I would have expected again, but this is not too late, the president to immediately set up a team on his own side because federal government is nebulous, is bohemian, huge, octopodal. We have to be specific, on the person that will lead the charge at the presidential level for this dialogue. And of course, if you ask me, I would say the vice president is in a good stead to do this, because we need somebody who is high up there to take charge of the dialogue in advance of reporting to the president, as the case could be. And of course, on the part of the protesters, what do we need? We need some level of organization, some level of synergy, direction, so that we know who the president will be talking to, because the youths that are protesting are obviously disaggregated. They are variegated, and of course, it speaks to what we've been talking about, that the Nigerian youths are not especially homogeneous, which is causing the damage, the crisis that we are seeing all over the country. The protests, are supposed to be disruptive, not necessarily destructive, And in messaging, when this kind of message, which a protest is supposed to represent, becomes destructive, of course, the message is lost, and of course, can provoke a countermand on the underside, which will not augur well for the entire system, as the case could be.
Thank you very much, Prof. Let's go to Owerri, where Johnson Chukwu, an economist, is there with us. Johnson, tell us, 4 days now of the protest, it must have been, a lot of economic losses for Nigerians, particularly the petty traders, just like the founder, chairman of Stanbic Bank and the Anna Foundation said at Tedo Peterside, that poor Nigerians can't sustain, the protest for more than a few days. What magnitude of loss would you say this protest must have brought to the average Nigerian and the government?
Okay, thank you, Chris, for having me. I think for an average Nigerian, most Nigerians actually live on subsistence income. So most Nigerians earn their income on a daily basis. So for an average daily income earner, they've been deprived of their income for about 4 days. But beyond that, even those formalized businesses like the transport operators, many of them did not operate for 4 days. The gas stations did not open, most of them did not open for 4 days. Several businesses shut down, and I think that should also have been the priority of the government. Beyond the private business operators counting their losses, the government should be counting the macroeconomic loss, the overall economic loss to the country. And that should be a compelling reason for the government to push for an early end to this protest. I think the president needs to go further than his speech to engage the disparate organizations. Yes, I've heard the comment that asks the organizers are disparaged, but we've had an instance where the former president, Umar Musa Yar'Adua, was able to engage very disparaged people in Niger Delta and was able to get them to stop attacking the oil facilities. So I think the government can still do the same thing. Yes, I mean, at the onset, prior to the start of this protest, there were some engagement between the government and an organized level or organized civil society groups that were planning the protest. So those people that they were discussing with, the government now needs to engage them more actively. I think it would beg logic for the government to just allow these demonstrations or protests to fizzle out. Because if we don't address the core of this problem, it will rear its ugly head again. The issue is cost of living crisis. I think the government needs to come out boldly to deal with the issue of cost of living crisis. And that's the shortfall or the drawback in the president's speech. I expected that the president would touch on the core cause of this protest. But unfortunately, the president sidestepped that. And that's obviously why the comments you had presaged in your earlier presentation indicated that a lot of people felt that the president's speech was short of dealing with the fundamental cause of this problem.
Well, thanks very much, Johnson from Owerri there. Let me come back to Professor Abiodun Adeniyi. You look at some of why, the protesters rejected the president's speech and some of the socioeconomic assurances that he's put on the table. That the economic, progress that the president read out are just for him and his friends. And that the insistence that the protests are politically motivated shows a deep disconnect or disconnection from the masses. How do you reconcile the president's speech on these issues and what, the protesters have responded with? Does that show the bohemianism in the president as you enthused earlier?
No. I didn't say the president is here. I was just trying to see that the government at the federal level is very huge, and sometimes we can see traces of elements of
non-conformism,
bohemian. Yeah, that's what the point I was trying to make. Okay. But back to your question, yes, it's okay. The reasons that the protesters adduced for this process, for this protest, didn't just start today. Some of them have been there even before before President Tinubu assumed office. So the pain has been long in coming, and of course, people have been patient, even endlessly. So sometimes some of these things can boil over. It's a accumulation that we are seeing. It's just unfortunate that President Tinubu is likely dealing with it. And of course, again, because he, in the last 1 year, has introduced some measures, that triggered some momentary pain, some particular pain. Yes, we've been assured that in the future we might begin to see the gain. But the pains are just palpable and they are obvious and, of course, difficult for people to bear. So this is just a natural reaction. You could see that the reaction was spontaneous. Earlier on, we thought that it wasn't going to be successful because the leaders were anonymous, but eventually we saw how the thing has become largely pan-Nigerian. So it's a long-drawn thing. It's gestated for a long time, and that's what we're seeing now. So, but I think what the president, the leadership, the president particularly, should do, he can't, maybe, again, he should just continue the dialogue. And I heard one of the protesters saying that they are taking this as a false speech. There's nothing wrong if the president addresses the populace or the protesters maybe every other day. Yes, it's a crisis time. He could engage more. And of course, when he engages more, people will feel gratified. And I was even beginning to think that what's wrong if the president can be slightly dramatic, if he demystifies his office, for instance, and maybe gets to the stadium, for instance, where the protesters are judicially confined to, and address them, go to meet the youth there and say, yes, I'm here with you. And of course, you could see the change in terms of optics and symbolism that could create, and it could be a new dimension to leadership response to protest. And maybe, Christian, let me add this as well, because television is very powerful in the times that we're in. We saw the president talking to us. I want to also make this point. It might look irrelevant to the discussion, but of course very significant. I imagine at a point that the president's cervical spine might be strained because of the positioning of the teleprompter. If you could see his eyeballs were up there, constantly looking up. The teleprompter seemed to be too high for him, and I was wondering why it wasn't well positioned, such that he could interact with us through his body language, his eyes, because that's also part of communication. It's also part of messaging.
Ask the national broadcaster that.
It's not just about what he says, but of course the body language also matters. You know, it was not looking as if there was life in it. You know, I mean, the technical people around him should help him better. And of course, I know we are Nigeria, a great nation, who could do better. That's another point, a point I think I shouldn't let go. But overall, I think we are on course, provided that destruction, you know, that is being perpetrated by a section of the protesters, you know, are discontinued. That's the major downside of of what is panning out. That is very regrettable. That any sane person would definitely note.
Well, thanks, Abiodun. Let me go back to Johnson in Owerri. Look at the president has really taken time, you know, to reel out his achievements. He says, let me just quote a bit, in the last 14 months, our government has made significant strides in rebuilding the foundation of the economy that was, you know, populated with the issue of petroleum subsidy and the rest, where neighbors were benefiting, is reduced very significantly. The budget deficit, and 95% of it that used to service debt is now brought down to about 60% and the rest. Johnson, as an economist, these, you know, sound very laudable. Why did the president and the team keep such laudable achievements, you know, in 14 months to its chest and not apprising the Nigerian public? Miscommunication, disinformation, or non-communication here?
Christian, you know, one of the things I would say about the president highlighting his achievements at this point, I think whoever wrote that speech made a fundamental error. Because whatever achievement the president had to highlight now would be drowned by the fact that the people are complaining that they can't eat. I think that speech should have been part of the president's 12th of June democracy speech, or the 29th of May anniversary of his first year in office. I don't think highlighting at this point in time the president's achievement was what people were waiting to hear. But if we have to dwell on those issues, issue of removal of petroleum subsidy, the issue of reduction in debt service, I think it's too early to celebrate those two issues. And you know why? We know that the issue of subsidy has crept back into our petroleum industries because of the depletion of local currency. And I can also tell you, without fear of contradiction, that the federal government within the first week of this year, that is between January and the end of July, had borrowed about 19.9 trillion naira, and that interest obligations on that 19.9 trillion naira borrowed by way of federal government debt issuance, OMO issuance, and treasury bills will far outweigh whatever reduction that may have occurred as a result of shift in exchange rates. So I think it may be too early to celebrate those things. But I felt the speechwriter should have at least committed some paragraphs to the issues at stake. And that is the issue of the cost of living crisis that Nigerians are facing, are going through. And that would have gone a long way to assuage the agitation. Because if they feel that the president recognizes their challenges and the president is doing something about the difficulties they are having feeding their families, maybe they would have called off their protest. But to have completely ignored that and dwell on the president leading out his achievements at a time when people are complaining of different things will drown the purpose of sending that communication to the population or the populace. I think that's, for me, the way I take it. But like I said, those issues are also still too early for anybody to celebrate. The economy as it stands today, yes, the president has taken those steps, attempts to remove the subsidy, and mark my words, the word I use, attempt to remove the subsidy, because people like me had agitated the subsidy should go. People like me had agitated that the exchange rate needs to be harmonized. But I think there were some mistakes in the course of executing and implementing those policies that led to a deterioration in further drastic deterioration in exchange rate, and the deterioration in exchange rate led to the landing cost of fuel now going back to be above the pump price. And anytime you have a landing cost above the pump price, then you are talking of subsidy. I know that there are issues around the government buying refined petroleum product from Dangote in Naira, hoping that will, if Nigeria sells crude to Dangote and other local refineries in Naira, that could lead to, hopefully, lead to the production cost of refined petroleum landing cost in Nigeria being below the pump price. But until we get to that point, I don't think we have successfully eliminated subsidy.
All right, thank you, Johnson. Prof, when you look at the demands of the protesters who were once described as faceless, we are seeing their names now and the group or groups they belong to. They are just saying, end bad governance, which includes, you know, the octuple nature of governance, 48 ministers, several SUVs, you know, the allowances of the legislators in the midst of the poverty amongst the Nigerians. I hear they don't sell a cup of gari or rice anymore and the rest. The president didn't touch on that at all. So what does he want to dialogue on these socio-economic achievements in 14 months, which the protesters have come to show that they are relevant to their cause?
Yeah, that's a problem we've always identified, Christian, over the years, you know, that there's so much luxury amidst poverty, you know, in your face opulence, you know, which is not reflective of the economy of this country, and of course, which runs against the grain, of course, by leaders, you know, for the people to continue to make sacrifice, you know, because if you keep calling for sacrifice and we're not seeing it reflected in your actions, it becomes it becomes problematic, you know. And but again, I made the point earlier that this is not a problem that started just 14 months ago. It's been there with us as a nation, and of course, raises questions around our attitude towards public resources. You know, why do we not believe in Nigeria? You know, why do we just think that Mother Nigeria is an entity that should be pilfered, plundered, badgered, and battered? You know, why are we short in patriotism and nationalism? A bigger question that we need to be addressing, because these are things that is dovetailing into the attitude of public officials, where we see open luxury, you know, amidst poverty, and which is turning out to irritate the populace, as the case could be. So rightly, if they are talking about bad governance, once again, they are not wrong. They are obviously right, you know. But my concern, again, is probably the method. And I was arguing earlier on that because Nigerian youths are variegated, you know, we have the elite section that actually called for these protests, but of course we are seeing it being hijacked by people that lack understanding, and they're becoming very destructive, not realizing that the properties they are destroying belong to them eventually, and this is amounting to self-harm. So how much more destruction do we want to witness, you know, before we can see some remediation? That's the point I think we need to also bear in mind. But this is not to say that government should stop making efforts, you know, to remedy the situation, to assuage them, you know, because two wrongs cannot make a right. You know, government should remain elevated among above the irritations, you know, and of course, rise to the challenge of leadership, provide leadership at this time so that we can make progress, have peace, because this is not the time for us to see continuous protests, considering the loss it is making on our economy. And of course, we need our economy to progress, to prosper much more than ever before.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's go to Owerri and allow Johnson to take the last shot on this subject matter. Is protest a dialogue? What should Mr. President be tabling to assuage the youths of Nigeria? Not like how the President of the Senate, Akpabio,